Welcome to the world of tomorrow. You are about to take a journey out of this world into the world of the future.
The atomic age was born.
The world of tomorrow became the world of today,
bringing together all people in a new era of understanding.
Good sense requires that all of us prepare for any eventuality.
Imagine, if you can, an electronic brain operating at millions of a second speed.
Electrical pulses transmitted with the speed of light.
Limitless power at man's command. On man's wisdom, on his firmness in the use of that power, depends now the future of his children and his children's children. But wisdom demands, too, that we take time to understand this force.
Combat Information Center is alert. Its radars probing the darkness, ready to give early warning of any unseen enemy.
But have no fear, we are monitoring the situation.
All right, Steve, I want to tell you a story today to kick things off. So, as you know, I like to do strange readings in multiple different places, and something that I've been dying to tell you and to talk to you about to kind of get your reaction is the Skinner box. And perhaps you've heard of the Skinner box, but I thought it would be worth your time, and therefore maybe our audience's time, to dig a little bit more into what this box is. And as always, I'm looking at telling stories because I believe that stories reveal things that we often overlook. So B.F. Skinner was born in 1904, so a little over 100 years ago, in Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, just on the New York state line. He was the son of a lawyer, and his mother was a homemaker. He had a brother, but his brother died sometime in childhood. And he was a kind of tinkerer of sorts, one of these guys who like to invent gadgets and build things and all that sort of thing. So he's a kind of a consummate American figure, this sort of American tinkerer. And he had designs as a young man on becoming a kind of literary figure. So he goes to Hamilton College and majors in English and wants to become a writer. So he moves to New York City and he fails in this year, which he calls the dark year. And one of the things that he was doing, I think he worked at like a bookshop or something like that. Mm-hmm. He comes across the work of Pavlov and Watson, some of these early behaviorists in the field of psychology. And so after his literary ambitions meet the shoals of reality, he enrolls in Harvard in 1928 in their psychology program, and he earns his MA and his PhD in, I believe, 1921. His work there, informed by the work of Pavlov, of course, Pavlov's famous dog, in terms of you could sort of reliably prime an animal to salivate by the ringing of a bell, which signaled the
arrival of food.
The arrival of food, exactly. Good. So you know his work, or you've heard of his work. Mm-hmm. And so, but one of the things that drove him in his work is that he longed to develop a kind of rigorous scientific approach to a field which had largely been dominated by what I think I would call, maybe you would call them too, a kind of quasi-theologians and mystics. I'm thinking here of Freud and later on Jung and these types of people. And of course, I like that stuff. I don't mean to say that in any kind of dismissive way, but Skinner signals a kind of a decisive move toward the scientific method, right? And he really kind of means it. And he was what I think you might call a kind of data miner. He really believed in the power of data, and that will become, I think, a theme for this show as we try to unlock the kind of the mysteries of the mid-century. So after he invents in the lab what he calls a cumulative recorder, which, as its name would suggest, it recorded the rate of response over time to lab subjects. But he wanted to improve on the mazes and the puzzles of, these animal behaviorist experiments. And so, that were developed by some of the predecessors like Thorndike and some others. But this led him to create, in tinkering in the lab, his box, which he called the operant conditioning chamber, what we call the Skinner box. And the invention did not come about in any kind of like eureka moment with a sort of a dramatic moment in the lab in which he kind of runs back and sort of fiercely constructs this thing. But rather it came through kind of an iterative process. He's working in the lab. He's trying to get information and data so that he can draw some conclusions. And so he builds this box, which stems from his desire for precision, automation, and quantifiable data. He built some earlier prototypes himself, refining them to eliminate any kind of human error in observation and to allow for long, continuous recording sessions.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Can you describe the box?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if you were going to get to that.
Yeah,
but like in my mind, it could be anything. I've seen some pictures of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they different ways that it could be.
So in order to meet his needs for long-term continuous data accumulation with precision and automation, and for these sort of long recording sessions, he wanted to eliminate human error as much as possible. And so this hands-on box that he creates reflects, I think, in some sense, his lifelong habit of tinkering and inventing devices that would aid him in this work. And eventually, he'll even create a box for kids, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yes, I know. I see the smile. But the breakthrough came when he built this apparatus with a couple of key features, and I'm going to list them out for you here. It's a small enclosed box to isolate the animal from outside distractions. There's a lever or a bar or some kind of button that a rat or a pigeon could easily press with its paw or its beak, depending upon the animal. It included an automated food dispenser that delivered a precise pellet of food as a reward, a kind of reinforcer, immediately after the pressing of the lever or the pressing of the button. And significantly, a recording device that would automatically track every response, the presses, over time, often using a cumulative recorder that produced elegant graphs of response rates. It would even include, eventually, sensors on the floor of the box so that it could record movements in addition to the pecking and the pressing of the button. And you've seen these things on the internet. You can go on right now and you can look at them. But they were again a small shoebox size thing, maybe a big shoebox size thing with a kind of plexiglass or a glass frame, so you could make sort of human observations. But it was largely intended to kind of tune out the noise, if you will. And again, you and I have already talked a great deal about signal and noise, and the desire to tune out all of the noise in order to get just the signal that you're looking for. And so these chambers, or this box, enabled him to discover some key principles, including, I think most significantly, intermittent reinforcement schedules. That is, fixed ratio intervals or variable intervals, depending upon the time. So early buttons, you could, every time you press the button, the pellet would show up. Or it could get pretty complicated. If you press the button 5 times, then the pellet would show up. But the real magic occurs, and the real takeaways occur when you can vary that ratio so that the animal can no longer, like Pavlov's dog, predict a press is a pellet, or 3 presses is a pellet, right? So that what they found over time is that when you made it variable, it created a kind of obsessive behavior on the part of the lab rat. And so it began to function like like a slot machine.
Right.
And so we know the kind of obsessive addictive behaviors that a slot machine can press, because at each potential press of the button or the pull of the lever, something good might happen, but you don't know when it's going to happen. So all of this produced kind of remarkably consistent and persistent behaviors, insights that would reshape understanding of learning far beyond animals. And so, of course, the key move of the animal behaviorist, of course, is that not many people care about rats or pigeons, right? But what you're doing is you're drawing some kind of analog between a lab rat or a pigeon with a human being. And so, in short, the Skinner box emerged from Skinner's graduate work as a deliberate improvement on Thorndike's methods, simpler, more automated, focused on free operant response, and perfectly suited to reveal laws of behavior through reinforcement. It became, the iconic tool of behaviorism and remains influential in fields, like applied behavioral analysis today. So I think there are four aspects, goods, you might say, that have been yielded through the invention, implementation, and the study brought about through the Skinner box. Number one, it's unparalleled experimental control and precision, right? Unlike earlier tools that relied on an animal's sort of problem-solving sense or savvy, this was radically simplified. Press the button, get the thing, right? Number two, it offered objective, automated, and scalable data collection, right? The built-in mechanisms, the lever, the feeder, the cumulative recorder, produce immediate, continuous records of responses by the animal that can be averaged across many subjects mechanically, right? So you can see how it's taking a lot of what we might call subjective observations out of the equation. This dramatically reduces labor, enables larger sample sizes, boosts statistical reliability, and reveals lawful patterns that smaller or manual setups would miss, right? Because if you look away for a second, or you go order a pizza or what have you, you're going to miss some crucial data. Number three, it allows for the discovery of these laws that we're talking about, these sort of behavioral laws. It proved, number four, sort of practical applications across multiple domains, right? And so it's sort of this first, it's among the first, thing I would call like a data machine, right? Mm-hmm. And you can kind of see early signs of the power of data. Now, before I let you jump in here, I know I've been sort of Kale heavy here, but I'm sort of telling you this story. Every technology carries with it both spoken assumptions and cryptic or unintended assumptions. Here we see the logic of the machine applied first to animals, and ultimately and invariably upon human behavior. It smuggles in, now this is where I'm editorializing, it smuggles in what I think of as the sort of the great myth of control, controlling of variables and confounds in experimental conditions. And for me, a takeaway is that the Skinner box is a fabrication, right? It is an intentionally created environment, which then will yield recordable and transferable data. And the reason why I bring up Skinner here is I see Skinner as being one of the great architects of the mid-century imaginary. And here I'm using the word imaginary the way that the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor uses social imaginary. And this is what Taylor says, and then at this point I'll let you take off here. Taylor says about the imaginary, what I'm trying to get at with this term is something much broader and deeper than the intellectual schemes people may entertain when they think about social reality in a disengaged mode. I'm thinking rather of the ways people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them and their fellows, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie these expectations. So, so in light of what you and I are trying to do here with monitoring the situation, and all of the offline conversations that you and I have, what do you make of this Skinner box, and how do you think it might fit into the ways in which we're trying to see better and more clearly?
Well, first of all, I feel like I'm in a Skinner box right now because you asked me not to prepare for this.
Yes,
I wish I had actually grabbed a notebook because there were some ideas that kind of popped up as you were talking. I guess I don't know. You're asking a very broad question about something you're just introducing me to. So can you point me in a direction of what it is that you're looking to get?
Sure. For me, the two things are: it is a completely controlled world, right? And it is oriented toward and driven by the desire for data, ultimately zeros and ones.
So, and you're referencing it back to what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Like, we live in the Skinner box, right? Here, right now, you and I are sort of in a kind of digital Skinner box, aren't we?
I mean, one of the first things that I thought about when you were talking about the slot machine effect is, what we experience every time we go online. What are we going to find? Are we going to pull the lever and are we going to get good information? Are we going to pull the lever and we're going to get a bunch of people, being jerks to us? Are we going to, what is it going to be? There's an inception level of nested Skinner boxes that I suppose, you could say that we go through. And it's interesting because I didn't look into this, but last night I actually saw this thing about, there was an experiment. Have you heard of, it's called like the Pike experiment?
No, go ahead.
They had a fish tank and they put a pike on one side, very aggressive predator fish, and a bunch of smaller fish on the other side with a clear glass partition in the middle. And when the fish, the pike, when it saw the smaller fish, it would try to lunge at them so that it could eat them, and then it would bam, hit the wall and it would bounce off. And after it did that a certain number of times, they removed the partition, and it was so demoralized by the inability to get to the food that it saw that the little fish could swim right up, brush up against it, and it wouldn't even try to eat them, and it eventually starved to death.
Perfect.
Because it had been conditioned to understand it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're not going to get the food.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that comes up in the research too, but the conditioning to failure and the way that you can train someone to give up after repeated failures is a very interesting, but again, coming back to, first of all, we have to figure out what is the difference between the animals and the people. Like how similar are we in the way that, that we approach things? I would say that my impression is that we are all pretty trainable to some extent, but because of sapience and consciousness and self-awareness, we probably have an ability to reflect and to overcome those things. In terms of society and what we're doing here, I mean, we're conditioned obviously by a lot of things, by the information that we're given, by the environments that we're placed into. I thought when you were talking about it about quantum physics and like the double slit experiment, like observing the experiment changes the outcome. And I don't know how that fits here. Like, in order to record data, you have to create a certain set of artificial conditions. Then the question is, how do you get people into the box?
Right. And so I think that's exactly right. That how you get people in the box is, well, you create incentives, right? And this idea of controlling, of a sort of an experimental control is a super powerful, invention, right? That we can take this basic idea of the Skinner box, which is in part kind of creating incentives or disincentives, right? Because you can play with it either way, right? And you can make certain observations and yield certain laws of behavior. But if you can get to the source code of behavior, right? And look, I can poke 1,000 different holes into problems with the Skinner box, but that's not really why I invoke it here.
Mhm.
It works, right? It works in certain circumscribed ways. It works. And so therefore, if you can observe those laws of behavior, if you can observe laws of desire, like the pike experiment, if you can create disincentives for a pike to stop being a predator because it hurts so much, then you can control that too, can't you? Right? So that the pike example is we could observe a pike in the wild even going after smaller fish. That's just what it does, right? But by creating and I love the part that it's invisible, right? It's just this window that is dropped into the fish tank, which creates, it hurts. You keep banging your nose up against the invisible wall, and then it can short circuit and stop even instinctual behaviors. So therefore, by doing that, you can control that if you have enough control, you can deprogram a pike, and therefore the application of such a thing is it's almost too good of an opportunity to pass up.
I mean, it seems to me that what you just said there provokes the idea that the sense of a loss of control is essential in the conditioning. You have to feel like you have lost control.
Oh yeah,
because if you know that you are in a prison and you can't get out, you understand what the barrier is, and you're like, okay, I'm in here because I was sentenced for this crime, and I may be frustrated and everything, but I think about I don't think you ever finished watching Severance. We started watching it together, but there's this phenomenon that happens, and for those who aren't familiar with the show, just the basic premise is there are these people who work in a highly sensitive data environment in a tech company, and they have a procedure done. I mean, most people have seen the show by now, but just in case, they have a procedure done where they literally have a microchip installed in their head, and it severs their personal life outside of work from their life inside of work. So when they go in the elevator and they head up to the floor that they work on, something happens and there's a transition, and they forget who they are on the outside, and they only remember their work self. But one of the things that new people who have just been introduced to this scenario start to do is they try to leave. They don't want to be there. They're like, wait, I don't remember agreeing to this. And they'll watch a video of themselves saying, no, we agreed to this. And they don't I don't remember that because I don't remember anything. And then when they try to leave, they can't leave. Like they go toward the exit, and they wind up, like, when they try to go through the door, they come back inside. There's some phenomenon that stops them from actually leaving, but it's not something that they understand. It's not something that they consented to, or at least not consciously. And so that invisible barrier creates panic and paranoia in a way that something that you understand doesn't. So I think the sense of the loss of control is probably critical here in some way.
Right. And what's so interesting to me about the Skinner box, by the way, I think it's a perfect example of kind of what I'm trying to get at here. But what is interesting to me is that you can either program it for positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. And even that can be a kind of confusion, can't it?
Actually, does this relate in any way to the NIM experiments with the mice?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I don't. It's been a few years since I read up on them. It's been 5 or 6 years, but
the beautiful ones you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It was the National Institutes of Mental Health did this very elaborate experiment with mice where they gave them a utopia, and all these horrible behaviors emerged.
Yeah,
and it was a very creepy experiment. I wish I could remember the details of it, but again, I didn't prep, so I.
Yeah, so what they did with that experiment is they basically constructed homes. They had an infinite supply of food, so that the only thing that the rats, or the mice, in this case, I believe it was mice, the only thing that they had to do was to copulate. And so they did quickly and often and swelled the population. And then they all sort into like alphas and betas, and that's a whole interesting and the core, the sort of the alphas eventually stop. They stop doing anything because there's nothing for them to do. And they even stop copulating in this moment, which is, again, I think that's a sort of a perfect, I love it. You sort of bring it in this way. So no, going back to Severance, if memory serves, there's this great scene at the opening. I think it's the opening scene of the opening episode. And he's in his car in the parking lot. And you could tell he's just sort of like, do I want to go in?
Yeah.
And boy, like we could all very much relate to that, right? That moment you pull into the parking lot, you're like, So, but I think it's important, right? That, that you can run this experiment in sort of schedules of reinforcement or schedules of punishment, right? A positive form of reinforcement is, adding food or praise. A negative form of reinforcement would be, hit this button to turn off the loud noise,
Sure,
like the alarm clock. But in terms of the punishment side of the equation, the punishment could be, a shock. If you hit this button, you get a shock. Or a negative form of that is if you hit the button, you take away a toy or something like that. And so, of course, within the conditions of an experiment, you always have the sort of the expert, the scientist who's there in his, little white lab coat, and he's in control of the experiment. And so, if we take this as an image, as an idea, I'm always looking at the kind of the symbolic layer. Right? That's where I tend to go. Is there some kind of analogy that can be drawn to, the world that we live in, both in terms of meat space, but also in terms of, digital space?
Well, I mean, obviously, very, very clearly, teams of psychologists were employed to do things like engineer the like button on Facebook. And, there's a lot of psychological manipulation and reward structure built into the self, reinforcing behaviors that we now all do online. And those of us who remember the internet before social media, it was a very different world. You went to a bunch of different websites. You went to, whatever your favorite news websites were, or you would look something up and you'd wind up there. And the internet was a much bigger place full of a lot more diversity. And then around 2007, 2008, social media sites start to hit the scene and everybody begins congregating within these, for the purposes of your argument, we'll call them online Skinner boxes, right? Because they're these containers. I mean, now people go to 5 different social media platforms and that's pretty much it. They're not going to like a Drudge Report with links to a bunch of other websites to follow the news. In fact, all of these platforms disincentivize outbound links because they take you away from the platform.
Off platform,
where the money is made, where the eyeballs are kept, where the ads are served. And so, you and I both have Substacks, and whenever we try to post them to X for people to read, they don't see it. If we put the link in the main post, you actually have to put the link in the replies, because otherwise the post gets deprioritized by the algorithm because you're sending people off the site. You're sending them out of the box. So I mean, there's clear analogies there.
Yeah. Well, and as regards social media, we forget that the like button was actually an advancement. In other words, there was Facebook before the like button, right? There was Instagram before, the like button or the heart button, whatever it is, which is wild to think of.
Is that true? I thought that the like button came with Facebook. No. Because Facebook was really the first platform.
Yeah. No, it was, there's a guy, I've seen a documentary or two on this guy who actually created the like button. Like that's his claim to fame. And of course he's mortified, from what I can understand. The last time I heard of him, he was mortified, by what he had helped create.
It's interesting because, anybody who does any kind of, like, there are lurkers who just read.
Sure.
And that is a psychological phenomenon I don't understand.
Why?
But for those of us who make things
Why?
and put them, because I'm a maker, I put things out there, and I want interaction and I want feedback. But man, I cannot stand not attending to unread notifications. It drives me crazy. So if I've got the little red thing saying I've got 20 replies, I have to look at it. And I understand that, like, that's a behavior that's being driven, but at the same time I'm like, but I need to know, like, what is this? Well, and you can fall into this sort of compulsive checking, where you keep going back to see, oh, did I get more interactions? Did I get more interest? Did I get more replies? Did I get, and so it is very behaviorally enforcing, even when you're consciously aware of it. I mean, over a decade ago, I wrote a post about the evil psychologists behind social media. I should have to dig it up. It was on my old website before, I did anything big. But just that feeling of, like, I know you're manipulating me and I'm still doing it.
Yeah, that's the part that I can't quite wrap my head around. And the question that I have for myself, and you probably ask a similar question, is that, how in control am I really when it comes to my engagement on social media? The myth I like to tell myself is that I'm in control. Again, hazarding, to sound, I know that I'm going to sound like a kind of hubristic fool here, but I think I am largely in control, insofar as I'm able to kind of keep my wits about me. But that's not me saying that I'm not drawn to it in magical ways, right? I know that I like it. I know that I long to engage in it. I know that I know what that dopamine hit is like. I just really do. And, and man, there are some days, don't you feel like I can literally feel the release of that drug in my brain, you know?
It's a major dopamine hit.
But one of the reasons why we do this show, one of the reasons why we have this friendship, Steve, is that, you're one of the people that I go to, and I probably am annoying at this point, but I'm constantly sending you things, Steve, this real? But what I realize that, and I hope you realize this too, like, I'm not always asking for a specific answer every time, right? I mean, I don't want to add to
You're
your
just
own...
observing.
Yeah, I'm observing, and it's part of my mental hygiene, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, look, something we've talked about, and I haven't written the essay yet on the meaning crisis, but what the meaning crisis does is erode a sense of shared reality. And so, we don't know what to trust. We don't know what to believe. We have this diminishment of religion. We have this extreme polarization of political views. We have the introduction of fake information at levels that are unprecedented because it is so easy to fake things. It has gotten just exponentially easier. Like, I was looking for an old graphic that I made this morning because it had a quote on it that somebody used, and I started kind of thinking as I was going through my old design folders, like, the amount of work it would take me to make a graphic like that, whereas now I could just ask Grok, hey, make this thing, put this quote on it, and it's done in 5 seconds. I would spend hours on these things, right? So it's getting easier and easier to make stuff and make it look good and make it look believable and make it look real. And we've seen, we've talked about incessantly the proliferation of fake information, not just fake news, but just fake videos, fake photos, fake stories about things that never happened. And you're at a point where you have to vet everything.
Whole narratives, right? That are gameable. I mean, look, whole platforms, many influencers traffic precisely in their ability to kern and manipulate, and as you like to say, the red the red yarn phenomena of the internet grift. Right.
Well, and to make the kind of behaviorist point a little bit here, I see a very clear delineation between generations that were trained to trust everything that they heard, and their gullibility, their credulity when it comes to fake information.
See, I want to push back on that. I agree with the point. I'm not so sure it's generational. I think it's generationally different. So I would agree with you on that point, but I don't think that my students, for instance, are any less susceptible to online misinformation fire hoses.
Where I would make the clarification
Yeah.
is this. I would say, ask them if they feel that they can distinguish a real video from an AI video, for example. I've had conversations with a couple of people recently. I was at a coffee shop the other day and I ended up having a conversation with the barista. And she was like, yeah, like so many people can't tell that it's fake. She's like, I see it every time. I notice it. And I feel like the people who were trained to trust the experts, to trust the doctors, to trust the priests, whatever they said, to sit down to the nightly news every night and believe that what Tom Brokaw or Peter Jennings or Dan Rather said was the truth. Those people are much more likely to see a video presented in an official capacity and be like, oh, that's real.
With a little Chiron on the bottom and a fake little,
Yeah.
badge.
Whereas those of us who have dabbled more in creation of media and understand what goes on behind the scenes and, you know, have a concept of the way PR works and all this kind of stuff, like we know how much manipulation is going on. So we have an additional layer of built-in cynicism about things, and we may get fooled some of the time, but I think we get fooled less of the time because we kind of understand that we're in a little bit of a Truman Show situation.
Correct. I mean, look, you invoke the Truman Show. To me, the Truman Show is the Skinner box applied to entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so therefore you can kind of look at, the best Skinner box. The most effective Skinner box is the one that does not draw attention to itself as a Skinner box.
The invisible walls.
Yeah.
That is the key.
Yeah. And so, but, to sort of, the other day, we were sitting down for dinner, me and my family were sitting down for dinner, and a question comes up, and my wife loves the chat. Loves ChatGPT. And so she immediately takes her phone out and asks ChatGPT a question. And all three of my kids immediately are like horrified by this moment. And they're like, Mom, like, what are you doing? Like, none of us are going to be able to think anymore. These kind of things. And I'm not saying anything. Okay. Just for the record. And so, I'm laughing because like I get what they're saying and, et cetera. But, then one of my kids says something to the effect of, Mom, don't you know how much water the servers are wasting every time you prompt ChatGPT? All right. So why are you laughing?
There's the next layer because it's the next layer.
It's the next
layer of, but you've been propagandized in this way instead of that.
Right. And so I'm sitting there laughing at my Gen Z kids' horror at my Gen X wife's, consultation of the Oracle. And yet at the same, and laughing, like, oh, that's funny, noting that generational difference. But then immediately one of my kids invokes the second layer, as you call it, and is like, and like, where does that come from? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I wonder that all the time. My kids will say stuff too, where they'll repeat a narrative and I'll be like, where did you guys get? And the thing is like, they don't watch TV. They don't watch the news. They don't, they have almost no exposure to the traditional media environment.
Right. None.
But they're getting it through, they watch YouTube. They watch, like there's a whole different way this information reaches them. And I don't fully understand, in a comprehensive way, what the ecosystem looks like for how this information manages to not just be disseminated, but to sort of saturate these very non-coordinated asymmetrical media platforms.
Yeah. And what is also fascinating to me is that, it invokes a kind of more, like there's a moral response to that, right? Like their reaction was moral in two ways, right? Mom, you're letting the machine think for you, which is like, okay, like, okay.
Fair criticism.
Yeah, I'm down. But then it becomes the sort of this second layer, morality tale about, server farms and, raping the environment or something like that.
Right. And it's not even, I mean, I haven't looked into this, but I mean, we've lived on this planet with the same water for all of time. It's a closed system. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
There's a water vapor cycle. It doesn't go away. You don't just destroy the water. I mean, so, but I mean, there's a basic scientific layer there that's missing, but the propaganda still works.
That's right. And that's what's striking me so much, right? And look, another reason why
I don't want to say we're all Greta Thunberg now, but there is an element of that.
Yeah. Clearly, that is a moral component of the social imaginary that perdures independent of your conscious ideological frame.
And let me ask you, we haven't talked about this.
Yeah.
What if you had to pick one phrase that is emblematic of Greta Thunberg? What would it be?
How dare you?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Boil her down to one thing, and it's how dare you. It's moral scolding.
That's right. That's wow. That's we didn't plan that one, by the way, folks.
No, we have never had that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's like, but I knew like that is the meme that's buried deep with what she's done.
And why it's so effective, because nothing triggers a boomer like that "how dare you" line. I mean, really, it's like it is as powerful a spell as you could cast at any given time.
Where do you think that comes from? Why does that affect them so profoundly?
I think because the boomers were the first conscious generation, quad generation.
In the sense of
we didn't have,
they had the luxury belief of questioning the morality of their behavior instead of just surviving, kind of a thing.
But yeah, that's
their social behavior. Not like obviously.
Yeah.
Generations have done examinations of conscience and all this kind of stuff, but it's a new thing.
It's a new thing. It's a post-war thing. I mean, look, this is we can steer right into one of the deep themes of our show. The baby boomers were the first generation that were called a generation. Really, they were the first generation. They were the first teenagers. If you look at pre-war, there was no such category as teenager.
Yeah, they retconned the silent generation and the greatest generation.
Exactly. Good. That's exactly right. Right. They didn't think of themselves as the generation that grew up in the Depression. They didn't think of themselves as the generation that went to World War I or the generation that fought World War II. No, and so you had this sort of, again, it's so fascinating to me. Like when we think about the post-war consensus and what was constructed, right? They were the first self-conscious, again, I use self-conscious in scare quotes there. They were the first generation made to be conscious of themselves as a generation, right? Mm-hmm. They did not fight the war. They were the first teenagers. And of course, it's impossible to tell this story without marketing and public relations and ad men and mad men and all these kinds of things, right? It was sort of this magic concoction, this potion of, markets and goods, and they realized, the people who run the social imaginary realized that you could create an entire cohort of consumers. And you could market to them directly through Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, look, Saturday morning cartoons existed because it was the best delivery device for
commercials.
The thing. Exactly. Yeah. The commercials, right? It's like, you think of
a lot of the shows were direct marketing tie-ins to product.
Correct. I mean, look, you and I are the Star Wars generation, right? I mean, I just saw something on X this morning where, George Lucas signs off on, some percentage of the back end points on Star Wars in exchange for what the studios laughed at, which was the toy market. Mm-hmm. They were like, fool, fine, you can have that all you want. Meanwhile, he rides the toy market into literally billions of dollars.
Yeah. I mean, any kid who grew up in the 80s knew what it was like to watch a cartoon and hold the toy of the character on the screen and be like, hey, that's my guy.
That's right.
Like it created this immediate recognition of I'm part of something.
Mm-hmm.
It was very powerful.
So to go back to your Greta Thunberg point, the how dare you point, I think there's something about when you've been made to think of yourself as a generation, right? As a cohort, immediately you have to downplay the benefits of that cohort creation, and you become conscious in a kind of guilty sort of way about, the adjudicated grievances between generations. Now, look, I'm not saying that generational warfare didn't exist prior to the 1960s. That's not what I'm saying. You can see instances of that in prior generations. But the peculiar marrying of generational conflict with market forces seems to have created this sense that maybe Greta's got a point. Maybe I have been an unconscious consumer, and therefore I carry around this unexpiated guilt that as soon as she says those words, and of course it ties right in with the climate catastrophe script. And of course, you and I have joked before, one of the things that I think our millennial brothers and sisters really, really get is that their parents, the boomers, were the luckiest generation, like by massive degrees of luck, and of course we know all the memes, dad, bought his 4-bedroom house for $15,000 back in 1961 and refinanced it and sold it for $6-7 million.
I would say I had an experience relating to the millennials. They get a lot of crap, but it's more the Zoomers than them.
Yeah, I think so.
I did this thing totally unintentionally, and this goes to the psychology of what this layer of artifice, this idea of a generation does to people's minds, and in relation to market forces, where I saw this thing about it was a meme, something about millennials, remembering having Walkmans and landlines or something like that.
Yeah. Tell the story. This is good.
And so I without even thinking, it was my late night scrolling through X, just kind of having a drink, not thinking about anything. And I retweeted it and I said, wait, when did millennials have landlines and Walkmans, and I'm thinking cassette Walkmans.
Yeah.
And I got over 5,000 replies to that tweet, most of them angry. And millennials were all saying, what are you talking about? We're in our 40s. We grew up in the 80s. Like, we had all that same stuff. And I ended up digging into it. I was born in 77. That is the cutoff for Gen X. These things are not set in stone.
Yeah, they're fluid.
But millennials begin somewhere between 78 and 80, depending on which sociologist you look at.
That is interesting.
And they go all the way to 1996.
Yeah,
so the youngest millennials are 30 this year.
Yeah.
And the oldest ones are in their late 40s. And so they're like, we're not the generation you're thinking of.
Yeah.
But there was something that happened because the idea of millennials came in. It existed for a while, but it didn't become popularized until around 2012.
Interesting.
And it was another retcon. It was like, they used to, like, the older millennials used to be considered Gen X. Gen X went all the way up to like 1985 in the beginning. And then they changed it. And so I don't think of all my siblings are millennials. I don't think of any of them as millennials. I think we grew up in the same environment. We all grew up in the 80s. And and so there's this weird thing. And then there's a bridge category called Zennials, which is, the lower end of Gen X, me. I think you're just outside of it. And millennials have more in common in terms of cultural experiences. But the weirdest thing about it all was that the outrage that these people felt was being excluded from being part of a nostalgic piece of technology.
Wow.
That was the thing. I had Walkmans. I had landline phones. And it's like, why are you so upset about this?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm sorry I miscategorized you, but it's really important to feel like you're part of a cohort that had an experience, but all of our experiences now are pegged to products, technology, shows, movies, things like that. Like, they're not tied to real things. They're tied to these transitory market force based things.
And stories, right?
And stories. I mean, you just said it. You said we're the Star Wars generation. Like, that is the prevailing mythos of our childhood.
Yeah.
but it's fake.
Yeah.
It's just
yeah.
a movie. It's a series of movies, you know. I mean,
Right. And that's what I want to lean into, I guess, is the fakeness of it. Right. And again, you know, when I use the word fake, I probably prefer the word fabricated.
yeah, that's better.
Because, you know, fake has the sense that it's like some sort of malign trick. Right. And I don't want to leave it there, even though there's plenty fake about our fabricated world. But, you know, like this room is a fabricated space, right? You know, so when we think of, you know, humans, one of the curious things that span, you know, thousands of years is that we create nests. Now, again, I know animals do too, right? But we articulate spaces in such a way that we are trying to control an environment. And so I'm deeply drawn to these stories of arena formation. Right, that we craft and construct and fabricate arenas by which we act, right? And of course, the most on the nose version of that is, you know, the arch of a stage, right? You know, the proscenium arch, and, you know, there's a stage, and we all are sitting in seats in here, and there's a curtain, and the curtain is revealed, and people do things up here, and then we clap, right? You know, that's a sort of a perfect, or, you know, a soccer pitch or a football field, you know, the arenas that we create around these things, all a kind of technology that we know we're in a made up place, but it is ultimately an attention directing group device, right? So that, you know, in the best case scenario, what we're doing is that we are watching excellence, right? That we are drawn to an arena because we put heroes, actors, performers in this space in the middle of the arena so that we can collectively marvel at excellence.
But the very fact of having your attention directed to a spectacle, like if you are not aware that it's being directed to a spectacle, then something happens where the line between what's real and what is performative gets blurred.
Amen.
And so I think about, you know, we talk about movies as fabrications. The reason why Star Wars was so profound to people who were born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s is because as children, we can't distinguish real from fake. I mean, think about how many times you've had to tell your kids, hey, it's just a movie. I know you're scared, but it's just a movie. It's a story. It's not real.
Right.
When you're a child, it's as real to you as going outside and climbing a tree. Like, you don't know the difference.
And ultimately, even we cynical adults are drawn to those kinds of experiences in which we can forfeit our shut-off mechanisms so that we can believe.
We want suspension of disbelief. We want
absolutely. We want, you know, and so, gosh, my mind is going in like, you know, 50 different directions here. But this idea, right? I think everybody is fine with Hollywood, right? Understood as a kind of
it's a conceptual deception in a way,
right?
Yeah.
And look, one of the reasons why
not conceptual, consensual. Sorry,
consent. Yeah. Right. That's right. Right. It's a sort of a it's a story agreed upon. We might say. But this is one of the reasons why I love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood so much, because it is both about the fabrication of whatever gets beamed through the TV set, right? And then you've got those brilliant scenes at the start where they're interviewing, you know, the star and the star's best friend slash, you know, stunt double. And it's like behind the scenes at Hollywood and da-da-da. And I love, it's the whole vibe of it. Of course, I just love, but it's that invitation. It's like you're kind of like in the know, but if you scale back yet another layer, all of it is fabricated, right? All of it, you know, the actual TV show that's being produced, and he's the villain, you know, the sort of the stunt cast villain. But so too is the world in which he lives in. Like everything's made up. The Hollywood Hills, it's made up. And so he goes home and he sits down and they're watching the show together and like waiting to see himself in this fabricated arena. And not for nothing, but, they do call Hollywood the dream factory, right? And of course, this is a familiar trope. Movies have played with this, since the beginning, really, but that the dream factory is also a kind of nightmare factory too.
Yeah.
Right. There's this dark side. So, but with these examples that we're talking about, like, we know that there's a director. We know that there's a writer. We know that this is a device meant to capture our attention to sell advertising. Like, we know that. And so it's not, I don't really feel anything too nefarious with that, because I think it's just part and parcel of what we do as humans. We watch each other, right? But what is chilling to me, though, and this is, now I'm remembering why I wanted to tell you this Skinner box story, Steve, is that what if the government is a Skinner box, or a crafter of a Skinner box? What if Davos is, the crafter and fabricator of a Skinner box? And what if we don't live in the world we think we live in? And this chills me to my core, not because it's necessarily a new thought, right? You and I've kind of been talking about this stuff for a really long time, both here and offline, but there's just something about the news, what happens on Capitol Hill or doesn't happen on Capitol Hill, as a kind of dark and sinister Truman Show that is designed in some way to enervate us, depress us.
And by the way, I apologize. I'm living Murphy's Law of podcasting. There is a leaf blower outside.
Of course. Can't hear that. You're good.
Not a regular occurrence. Just happens to be happening right now. So if you pick it up, that's what's going on. I have found in my illustrious podcasting career that leaf blowers will always show up while you're recording for some reason.
Yeah. It's like, again, part of the Truman Show, right? You could imagine the guy like, Steve and Kale are recording.
Send in the leaf blower.
Send in the leaf blowers. Press the button.
No, there's a book in my large collection of started but not finished books called This Town. Was written over a decade ago. And I think the subtitle is Two Parties and a Funeral or something like that. And it starts at the funeral of, I forget who it was, some big Washington dignitary.
Yeah.
And everybody from both sides of the political aisle are showing up, and they're all buddy-buddy, and there's and it's this idea of the uniparty. Like, they're really not different. They all get together behind closed doors, and they hang out. There it is, right outside the door.
Of course.
And so, but it's about this artifice of, hey, we're debating in public, but in private, we're really not. But I also think that was a sort of a condition of a time that has changed. I'm getting the feeling there's less of that, and that the rancor and polarization is becoming more real. I'll never forget, I used to work with this Democratic strategist, who worked with a couple of different presidents. I won't name him, but when I worked at the PR firm, I worked with a lot of these guys. He was actually a really good guy, and he was friends with Pat Buchanan. And this guy was far left, right? Yeah. And Buchanan is as far right as you can go. But they would go on a show like Crossfire, and they would argue with each other, and then they'd go out to dinner afterward. And I remember this guy, his name was Peter, I'll say that. And he said, that's going away. Like, we can't do that anymore. We used to be able to argue and then get together and hang out and have our friendship. And he's like, that's not happening anymore. And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah. My brother has said the same thing. My brother's been a Hill rat since 1989. He's worked in and out of Washington, D.C. off and on pretty consistently since 1989. And he says it's very different. Very different. And increasingly worse in time, And I think that,
but it makes it that much more difficult to discern the very thing that you're asking about. Like, how much of what we're being subjected to as real is a show, and how much of it is actually happening. And the ability to discern that is very difficult. And so that gives rise to this kind of neo-Gnostic informational priesthood where people show up and they're like, the real story behind what's going on is this. And then they give you some long conspiratorial explanation for what's actually going on behind the scenes. Yes. The red yarn.
The yarn. Yeah. No, I mean, I that, and look, I love the red yarn. Like, most of what I do is mental, imaginal red yarning and putting dots in the cork board and making these kinds of connections. You and I are unregenerate fact pattern watchers and constructors. And I think you have to, if you're going to play this game, I think you have to. But I've grown increasingly uncomfortable with, it's one thing to monitor for predictability, right? Which is what we do. But it's another thing when I see people using that exact same power to shape and to nudge. Nudge is such a cute word. I hate even using it, but I use it because that's what a lot of social scientists use. This idea of the nudge, right? And it's like think tank wonkery. It's one of those words that hides, in my estimation, true skullduggery at scale.
But what constitutes a nudge, and are all nudges nefarious?
Well, a perfect example of a nudge is the beeping. I got a new car the other day, new to me. It's an old car. And it's a Toyota. And if I put the car in drive and I haven't buckled my seatbelt, this thing starts beeping.
And it's the most annoying sound in the world.
My gosh, I want to punch the car. I want to smash the car. And it's like, okay, I'll do it. Now, why does that exist? Well, that exists because they have found that people tend to buckle their seatbelts when they have this annoying nudging sound beeping until you click the belt. So that's a nudge. They have found that people are more likely to save if you take it out of the paycheck beforehand. That's a nudge. And these are small little forfeitures of agency that most of us don't raise, most of us don't raise too many eyebrows over such things because we can kind of say, okay, fine, like do it. But if you take that idea, and you live through 2020 and 2021 and 2022, all of a sudden those nudges turn into something much more nefarious than a nudge. I mean, you're talking about the emergence of a kind of turnkey totalitarianism. And my sneaking suspicion is that the build out for this kind of nudged totalitarianism has a much older story than 2020, for God's sakes. That in many respects, the government, post-war here I'm talking about, has done almost nothing but construct an elaborate nudging and control of the Skinner box behind the scenes. So that another one of our topics that we like to talk about, of course, is disclosure. And so it's really hard to figure out what the heck is going on. I don't have to tell you this. You live in this headspace. And,
disclosure of potential non-human intelligences on our world.
NHIs, UAPs,
just for the purposes of our audience who may not know that disclosure means that.
Yeah. I'm just using this as an example, but my new suspicion is that this disclosure story sits on top of an even bigger story and who knows where it meets and diverges and all of that. But the information regime that we live in is a Skinner box. It's not just the internet. It's not just Hollywood. It's not just CBS News or what have you, right? That the government has built this thing out. And I don't know what even to make of that.
Well, I mean, do you have a suspicion of what we're being trained for? I mean, the Skinner box ostensibly is not so much for training as for data. It's to see how we can be trained.
Yeah, originally it was for observation. But what they realized is that you could create slot machines, right? And so my sneaking suspicion, my fear, and maybe this is just like old school, cranky conspiracy theory Kale, but my sneaking suspicion is that we exterminated the totalitarianism of Germany and we outlasted the totalitarianism of the Soviet Union, only to find ourselves in something much more subtle, but no less more controlling than the regime, the blob, the cathedral, whatever, word you choose to use here. And so what does that mean? What does disclosure mean in that? God, heck if I know, man, but it sure stinks.
So I don't mean to be entirely contrary here, but I don't know about you. I would prefer soft totalitarianism to hard totalitarianism, even if it's something that you can't necessarily see. And in that respect, like you don't necessarily have the opportunity to rebel against it as clearly as obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, this goes back to the conversation we had about that article that we were talking about yesterday. There was an article that came out in a French magazine about, it was written by a Franciscan friar about whether, sort of rhetorically, whether Peter Thiel should be burned at the stake for his heresy in basically trying to create a technocratic elite that acts as the catacomb that holds back the Antichrist. And just this idea of, people at large do not seem to be capable of coherent or productive self-government. And what do we do with the idea of maybe the bread and circuses are better than the alternative?
Yeah, boy, I hear you. I hear you. And I certainly don't want to give you or the audience the sense that I long for the good old days when I could fight a Nazi or, suffer under a Nazi regime, especially with the last name that I've been given.
Yeah.
But nor would I want to grow up in East Germany or East Berlin. But it had the upside of being an obvious villain. And, you could kind of focus on an obvious villain. So just wanted to put that out there. But I don't want to live in the Truman Show. I don't. I don't want to be married to a fake wife. I don't want to go to a fake job. I don't want to, you know what I mean? I don't want to worship at a fake church. Like I don't want to eat fake steak and fake Cabernet. Like Cypher in The Matrix.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that the cost of living in the empire is that in order to live under the largesse of the empire, I have to live under its privations as well.
I mean, hasn't that always been the case in one way or another?
I mean, I don't know, Steve. Again, I try really hard to guard myself from the kind of sentimental nostalgia of a simpler time, But in the world that you and I grew up in was not rainbows and roses, but it was real.
Was it? I mean, I don't know that it was.
Okay, that's good. That's
I mean,
worth it's worth.
How many terms did FDR have and nobody knew he had polio? Nobody knew that he was in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
They hid it from the public.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many layers of artifice.
Yeah. No, I grant that. But at the end of the day, let's say that you and I were two teenagers growing up under FDR's fake presidency.
Mm-hmm.
The day-to-day effect that had upon me as a teenager was pretty minimal. Just because of the technology was not in place to be able to affect me in my day-to-day life, right? I'd stroll on down, I'd walk to school. I would walk home for lunch. I'd walk back to school and then maybe go to football practice, read a book, hang out with some friends. Maybe on Saturday I would take my quarter and go watch a movie and get some popcorn and a Coke, right? There's a simplicity in that's not, I'm not receiving all of these inputs all the time. And now, like, when's the last time you tried to pay for something with cash? Like, you can still here in this country, but I think both of us recognize that that's going away pretty quickly. I've been to England for the last 4 summers, and I think about the difference of going to England in the 2020s versus going to Rome in the mid-90s. And, when I go to England, I've never exchanged a pound. I've spent well over a month of my life in England in the last few years, and I've never exchanged a pound. I've never paid cash for anything. I just swipe my phone.
But why does it bother you?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
because paper money isn't any more real than digital money. So...
Right. But the dollar that I take out of my wallet, as soon as I exchange it for, a coffee, is not Kale's dollar. It was never Kale's dollar. It just happens to be the dollar that's in my pocket, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of anonymity and freedom in exchange. Whereas now,
I see,
the digital footprint is such that somewhere, some Palantir-like server
knows all your spending
knows
habits.
exactly what I did.
Yeah.
All 4 of those times.
Yeah. See, I keep coming back to my axiom that privacy is a pretense and has been for so many years that there's no point really trying to guard it anymore.
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I'm trying to draw our attention to what we might be losing in this frictionless exchange.
It's funny that you bring up cash, because I actually posted something the other night. I was out one evening and I was downtown here in Raleigh.
Yeah.
And I was getting in my car and a panhandler came up to me and he asked me if I had any change. And I was like, brother,
nobody's got change.
I was like, I don't carry cash on me. Now, I actually do. Not much, but I usually have a little bit just in case I need it. But I was like, I don't carry cash on me. Everything's done with my phone. And then I posted and I said, if I was a panhandler, I'd go to the library, public library, where I could use a computer, and I'd print out a QR code and I would link it to my Cash App and my PayPal and my Venmo. And when I wanted to ask somebody for money, I would just have them scan my QR code, because then nobody could get out of it. And, I'd probably get more that way.
Yeah. You absolutely get more. Yeah. The buskers do this in England already.
Do they?
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
I've had this idea for a long time. Like, these people with these signs, they're not up to date on their processes. Right. They need it. They should have a story when you go to their page.
The difference between a druggie and a busker, right?
Yeah.
Is, of course, the busker just wants the money because they're trying to pay for rent. The panhandler tends to, I'm making gross generalizations here, but is trying to get drugs, right? And drug dealers, last time I checked, never, but I would imagine that a drug dealer is probably not all that keen on getting money via Venmo.
That's true.
So maybe the drug dealers will hold out for cash. I don't know. But
that does seem to be the last province of cash transactions is sketchy stuff.
Right.
Like it's the places that are laundering money. It's the places that aren't paying taxes.
And I think that's on purpose.
Yeah.
That my point is getting back to our Skinner box theme here. Who does it serve? Right. Who does it serve to do everything through Apple Pay? Right. And it's not just Apple. I mean, Apple's getting minimal, it serves the digital infrastructure of surveillance.
But it is also undeniably easier for us as well. It's easier to track your expenses.
Right. It's
easier to know where everything went. It's easier to look up, hey, how much did I spend when I was at that store the other day? Like,
but it's also the case at the same time that it makes it much less likely that you personally will track it. Right. Like
no, that's true.
Like on a Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Saturday or Sunday now, right, is my, go get stuff done day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll run to the gas station and I'll run to BJ's and then I'll run to Aldi's and then, I'll stop at Walmart, whatever. I'll do my rounds and I can go through that entire day. And you know what it's like. I mean, you can drop $800, lickety split.
Because there's no friction.
But I drive home and I'm like, oh, well, got my groceries. Like I didn't. Now, yeah, anyway, I didn't, think much of it. And, and you're right. There's ease and there's convenience. But what I've trained myself or what I'm trying to train myself to do is that when something is frictionless, what is the buried cost? Right. And again, me going to I don't care if Palantir or the government, same thing. I don't care if they know I went and got a coffee, right? But I probably should care a little bit more that any of us can be reasonably tracked very quickly. Most of the time I'm not trying to break the law. But what if?
I mean, but again, and I really want to come back to the main point here, but that went away when we all started carrying multimedia sensory tracking devices with us 20 plus years ago.
Yeah. But it went away without consent. Now I know the terms and conditions. I had to click many, many buttons many, many times, right? But that's kind of bullshit too.
But I mean, but if you were aware of the fact that I'm carrying a device that is capable of recording audio, then later video, photos, all this kind of stuff, understanding I'm carrying a wire. I'm basically wearing a wire everywhere I go. I remember being suspicious of that stuff, before 2010.
Yeah.
Or, to give an example, going back to the disclosure topic, I watched this interview with Matthew Brown, who's one of the whistleblowers from inside the Pentagon about the whole UFO program that they are alleged to have there and everything. And he said that he was invited by a member of the intelligence community, I believe, to go into a skiff, which is a secure, contained information facility. It's like, you can't bring anything.
No
with you
Wi-Fi
in,
no Wi-Fi out.
Yeah.
No cell phone signal in, no cell phone signal out. No
and so
radio in, no radio
he's being
out.
interviewed about this, and they asked, did you even bring your phone with you? And he said, no, absolutely not. And I forget, maybe he did say that if it was CIA or FBI, wherever it was that he went. And they were like, well, why didn't you left your phone at home? And he said, yeah, because I have talked to other people who have gone, have been, guaranteed privacy and all this kind of stuff. They come out of the skiff, their entire phone has been hacked and copied. And then they just play dumb and they say, oh, well, that wasn't us. We don't know what happened. And it's like, but they have the ability to do this stuff at any time.
Well, not only do they have the ability, but they do it. Right. And I think that's so I bring all this sort of stuff up. And look, I hear you. You sort of have, this sort of illusion of privacy. I know what you mean by that. But I don't think that we should be okay with it. And especially in this meaning crisis that we're living through, my sense is that real experiences, which is increasingly synonymous with non-digital experience is going to be more and more and more and more difficult. And I worry that more and more of us is being drained because we've been conditioned to sort of accept the conditions of this digital imaginary, and so the Skinner box is not just for observation. The Skinner box that we live in is also for predictive shaping, that it is an operant behavior mechanism that is, a controlled environment. And I want to hold out. I want to hold out for non-controlled environments as a necessary condition for human freedom and flourishing. And
so I want to
I know
separate
I'm a
something
dinosaur.
out. I want to separate something out because I think we've been digging at this for about an hour now, and I want to get back to, because this is something you've been preoccupied with for a long time, and I've seen you sort of worrying away at it cryptically, like you do when you're trying to figure out an idea. I've seen you talk Skinner boxes. I've seen you talk black boxes. I've seen you talk about behaviorism. I've seen you talk about all this stuff. This is not just a random, hey, we picked a topic out of a hat conversation. There's something that you're trying to get at here. And you did the teacher thing in the beginning and asked me questions, and okay, but I wasn't sure where you were coming. So I want to know, where are you coming from with this? What are you seeing? And what are you connecting it to? And where is the concern? And secondarily, is this leading down the path towards the bigger discussion that we're going to have at some point about what happens if the tech bros are right and AI hyperabundance is going to make it so that nobody has a job anymore and they're going to live off of the government dole, and then what are they going to do with themselves? Because I feel like that's the biggest Skinner box in a way that there is.
Amen.
So yeah, I'm going to press you to be more direct.
Yeah. So I think what is at stake is nothing less than humanity. So that's the easy answer, and we can unpack that. I see in my classroom every day kids who are great kids. Like, I love my kids; they're great students. Genuinely, like they're good kids, and they're funny and they're a pain in the butt, and they're all those things, right? But they're human. But I see them struggling with their own humanity in ways that strike me as different. And I'm not just trying to sound like the unk in the room, right? And it's not like you and I didn't struggle with our humanity in the 90s when we were going through our schooling. We did. And I'm not positing some kind of, nostalgic past, nostalgic golden age. But there are certain things that the digital Skinner box seems to preclude. And it seems to preclude your depth. It seems to preclude activities that are not efficient. It seems to, and I almost want to say occlude, but I'll stick with preclude for the time being, that the ultimate subject for the regime appears to be a non-iterative, non-producing purchaser of stuff. Not that I care about purchasing things, right? I don't. In other words, people are freaking out about AI, AGI, for AI, all these sort of things, because they fear that it's going to mean the end of what you and I have always known of as the economy. You go to work, you make money, that's the exchange, and you try to carve out a life for yourself and for your children, and all that kind of stuff, right? And there was a sort of a social contract that was in play, and I worry that is being taken from us by powers that are not clear. They don't wear jerseys. To go back to the communist example or the Nazi example from earlier part of the conversation,
brown shirts and skins.
Yeah, right. And like, I care about, our children, but the students that I teach, I care about, finding a pathway, finding a spouse, getting married, having kids, right? Like doing this generational iteration over time in which we can carve out space for the good. And I don't know who's got their finger on the levers. Like, I don't know who Dr. Skinner is in this scenario. But it appears to be people who don't like humanity. And it appears to be people who have no problem cracking eggs to make omelets. And that concerns me. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too vague.
Do you believe that this is intentional and directed behavior or an emergent behavior that comes out of a system that rewards the exploitation of the masses?
Yeah. It depends upon the day. Depends upon the hour sometimes. I am of two minds about it. And I mean that, I sometimes I think it's, people who twirl their mustaches, in dark rooms. And then sometimes I think that it's just this unleashed egregore, that's just kind of doing its thing. But I don't know, man. Steve, don't you feel, and again, your current cynicism aside, don't you want your freedom? I mean, don't you want your agency as a human being?
Well, yes, but I have come to question through a lot of experiences and research how much agency we really have. I think free will is is exaggerated because there are so many conditions in our lives that automate many of the processes and the decision making that we do.
What if you can control those conditions?
Well, I don't think you can.
See, but what I'm trying to argue is that the Skinner box is an attempt to control those conditions.
So, the Skinner box imposes conditions for sure, but I mean, as individuals, one of the things that you learn when you begin investigating things like complex trauma that happens that forms people when they're children is that it actually affects the physical structure of the brain. It creates neural pathways. It inhibits the development of the prefrontal cortex, where you make intelligent, informed, and wise decisions. It exaggerates the role of the limbic system, which is reflexive and non-conscious. And so one of the things that people who grow up in abusive environments and things like that tend to do is they have these impulsive and erratic behaviors that are non-rational. They're pre-rational.
Okay.
Their limbic system reacts to something before they even have a chance to think it through, and then they've engaged in a behavior, and then it has downstream consequences. So that this is just one area of.
So I accept that.
Mm-hmm.
So keep going.
So this is just one area of, like, when I was younger, particularly, I dealt with a lot of anger because a lot of anger was dealt to me when I was a kid. And I kind of learned those responses, that it was a fear response that turned into anger. And I would often say, I don't even know I'm mad. And next thing I know, I'm yelling. Right. And I would try to explain this to people who would be upset by it. And I would say, I'm not doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
I didn't think it through. I didn't make a choice to yell. I just found myself yelling. I thought I was fine. And now here I am. So I've done a lot of work on fixing that aspect of myself. But it's that recognition of this thing that was not a conscious choice that I made, nevertheless, had very significant effects on the people around me, on the quality of my life. Et cetera, et cetera. That's one area. There's a lot of behavioral areas that come from that early childhood nurture that we don't choose, but we act in a certain kind of way.
But look what you're doing now.
Sure. But what I mean is, my argument here is not that we are drones. It's that a lot of our behaviors are, unbeknownst to us, influenced by factors that create autonomous outcomes. We make a lot of choices, that we don't necessarily realize we're making as a choice, because it's at the level of reflex. You bang the hammer on the knee and the leg goes out, right?
Yeah, precognitive.
Like I saw a tweet today with a quote from somebody about, all sin is essentially an attempt to fill a lack, a void of some kind. And I thought that was interesting, because there's, if you can find a hedonist in the world, you will find somebody with a deep and abiding sense of internal pain. They're trying to assuage the pain through a pursuit of pleasure.
Yeah,
and because
I guess
pleasure never fills the pain, they keep pursuing pleasure, and in the process of so doing, they continue to corrupt themselves. So I'm not saying you can't hijack those processes, that you can't become aware of them.
Because the psychopath and the sociopath, they do in fact hijack that, right? And so my problem with merely, but my problem with the sort of the it's all trauma take is not that I don't believe that it's real, number one, not that I don't believe that it provides real explanatory power, but for me, it doesn't tell the whole story. Trauma is not new, right? This is not something that, this is not, part of the post-war consensus, right?
No, but neither is psychopathic behavior or maladaptive coping mechanisms or any of the rest.
So again, we're back, to the problem of evil, right? And I know that you are in the process of ridding yourself of a kind of overactive scrupulosity and a religious frame that was trauma reinforcing more than it was trauma releasing. So I don't mean to be insensitive about that at all, because a lot of times what passes in religious circles as evil is just not evil, actually.
Yeah. And fear is an incredibly potent mechanism of control.
Yeah. And so, when we've had our conversations about hell and universalism, when you and I have gone down this path, I think you know enough about me to know that I'm not like licking my chops, imagining, ooh, I can't wait for all these people to go to hell,
Sure. Yeah.
But there are people like that, for sure. And I think that's important to sort of remember. But the evil, there's a small sliver of the population that appears to be the case perennially, that are, in fact, able and willing to hijack other people to do things against their better interests, something like that. Right. And so what I see you doing with this trauma work that you're doing, like, you're unraveling some very real things that need unraveling. And that is you taking agency over the scripts and algorithms that you inherited. And I applaud you for that. But it's not exactly a walk in the park. But that's a necessary thing for you to do as a human being.
The reason that I bring it up is because, as somebody who is very reflective, as somebody who constantly is reevaluating, what am I doing? Like, is this what I want to be doing?
What am I even doing here?
But I mean, it still took me 40 years before I started saying these behaviors that I am engaging in are not things I'm consciously choosing to do. I don't like the outcomes of those behaviors. How can I figure out how to deprogram these things that I don't remember ever intentionally choosing?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
And I use that as an example of diminution of free will, because I think, first of all, most people, not all, But in general, if we're going to generalize the aggregated masses of, the average IQ in this country is 98. There's certain things that we look at and we say, we all see examples every single day of people who are not self-reflective at all, who do not engage voluntarily in the work of figuring out themselves. I mean, even some of the smart people, Mark Andreessen last week saying that, the great men of history don't introspect. It's like, what? No, I try not to think about anything in the past at all. It doesn't do you any good. You just dwell on stuff. I just move on. And there is a truth to that. I mean, this is something we've talked about. There's a certain sweet spot in IQ. If you go too high, you overanalyze everything. If you go too low, you don't think about anything at all. There's a sweet spot in the middle where you're smart enough to know what to do, but dumb enough not to second guess. And those are the people who tend to be the most successful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the old line that the C minuses of the world rule the world.
And so a lot of times smart people will look at the people who are billionaires or whatever, and they'll say, "How did that guy make all that money? He's not as smart as me." Well, that's why, because you're so smart that you can't stop thinking about all these things, and you're tripping over your own feet, right? So all of this is to say, I do think we all, trauma is one example that I was just using to illustrate, have certain amounts of behaviors that are programmed into us that we engage in without it rising to the level of cognition.
Yeah. Okay. So we over-index freedom, whatever we're calling that. We over-index freedom and agency, and we under-index the confounds, in this case, of trauma.
I mean, it goes back to your example of ChatGPT and water usage, right? Like, they're aware of, hey, ChatGPT is making it so that we're thinking for ourselves less, but they're not aware that they have also been subjected to their own version of the same thing.
Right.
And so we do over-index freedom. We think we're capable of being as free as we want to be, but we are often blind to the things that inhibit our agency.
So there's a pivotal moment in the Truman Show. We were just, and he realizes that he's living in some kind of simulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That his wife is not really his wife, and that the town is not really a town; it's a set. He has this sense, and he gets in a sailboat and he sails into the horizon, and he reaches the limit.
Sure.
We were talking about video games.
The texture wall, yeah,
the texture wall in a video game, and he smashes through it. And gosh, it's been so long that I don't even remember how the movie.
No, I don't either.
So
I actually have been thinking I need to watch it again.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we should do a joint watch. And so anyway, but we have this enduring myth, and I don't mean myth as in a lie. I mean a myth as a story. Part of the story that we inhabit, all right, is that we can actually craft and construct our environments for flourishing. But we can also smash through the limit. We can smash through the Skinner box. We can smash through the set. What do you think of that?
I feel like it's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay.
Yes, in individual instances, there are people who can smash through, who can wake up from the matrix to an extent. But again, I feel like there are concentric layers of artifice that we're all dealing with. And we may wake up from one ring and not realize there's another one outside of it, It's a Potemkin village inside a Potemkin village.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult, particularly when we can't clearly identify, like you said, who's pulling the levers on the Skinner box. Like, we don't know. Is it an egregore? I tend to be inclined towards egregorian theory more than towards mustache twirling theory, only because I find I am the most allergic to conspiracy theories that require an enormous amount of competence from a group of people that exerts an insane level of consistent control for a long period of time. That to me,
yet we have examples of this.
We have some.
It's like it's not a category of zero.
No, it's not a category of zero, but it also by necessity has to be very restricted in its scope and in its action, because the more overtly the controlling hand is controlling, the more likely it is that people will see it.
Okay, so do you believe in totalitarianism? And again, I don't mean that snarkily.
Like-
actually,
Like that it exists?
like there's this thing that happens, right? You know, that like, okay, like one of the things that you and I have talked about the last 5 years is this book Chaos by something O'Neill, and it's ostensibly it's about the Manson murders, but all of a sudden this story about the Manson murders turns into like this wild story about the CIA and all kinds of stuff. And so for me, that book opened up all kinds of avenues that I had consciously and unconsciously just shut off as cuckoo crazy land. And like, imagine being, you know, like, so we know, for instance, now that the CIA did all kinds of crazy stuff in Latin America, you know, with the fruit companies and regime changes and all this kind of stuff.
We actually linked to a video on our last episode of like 20 countries the CIA, you know, changed the regime in during
not
the 1960s.
least of which was Iran, right?
Yeah.
Iran. You know, good. So can you imagine reading like the Washington Post or the New York Times back in like 1958 and like reading this story and be like, oh God, that's so weird. Like, I wonder what's going on down there. You know, good thing we're there to help clean up that mess.
Sure.
You know, so
but those kinds of operations are predicated upon plausible deniability, small groups of people in the know, tying up loose ends, like not
offing people, like certain scientists involved with gravity, for instance. So I don't know. Like, it's a Skinner box. You know, it's a Skinner box, and there's a baseline in which things are real and not real. Things are true and not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like whether you and I can arrive there and like flourish in truth land or something like that remains to be seen, right? You know, this side of, you know, dying. But it should at the very least be a goal.
So there
like
is
to get to
no.
get,
Look,
to get
I understand what you're saying, but I also think, you know, whether it's the Skinner box metaphor, whether it is astroturfing, whether it's, you know, Eric Weinstein's concept of managed reality, much like Hollywood, the political and state actor version of whatever this is that we're talking about expects a certain degree of consensual deception. Like, we're all going to agree to the fact that we know you're lying to us. Because the more and the closer you get to the truth, the more of an outcast you become, the more danger you find yourself in. I mean, to give a perfect example, this is public knowledge, and you and I have talked about this, but Congressman Eric Burleson, I think Missouri is where he's from. He's been investigating this UFO stuff because he's been present at a number of congressional hearings where whistleblowers have come out and said the U.S. government has a program where they're retrieving crashed UFOs and they're trying to reverse engineer the technology, and they will do anything to keep it secret, right? So his job, because it's congressional funding that is allegedly going to these unacknowledged special access programs, which, by the way, an unacknowledged special access program, a USAP, the whole point is the Mission Impossible thing, where it's like, if you're discovered, we will deny that we ever knew you. That's what unacknowledged means. And then there's an even higher level one called a waived unacknowledged, a WUSAP, and there's all this crazy secrecy, right? But so he has this list of names that he has been given to look into, right? And he's going, by the way, to physical locations where they allegedly have or had crashed UFOs, right? And President Trump has given him the authorization to go to these sites, right? So this is a real thing that's really happening. So he has this list and he sits down with a guy. I believe he said that he was a special forces guy that he knows. And he's vetting the list of names. And the guy points to the list and he says, these 2 names, if you talk to these people, they will have you killed. They have the capacity to do it and they will not hesitate. Do not interview these 2 people, or that is very likely to happen. And he's a sitting congressman. Like, we're dealing with levels of control that the closer you get to the truths they don't want you to know, the more danger you find yourself in, the more likely it is that you're going to have your reputation destroyed and you're going to be, I mean, they use cult tactics, you know, they separate you from your friends and family. Matthew Brown talked about that in the interview that I watched with him last week. He said that they are going to the people who helped the whistleblowers about the UAP subject, not the whistleblowers themselves, to people in their circles of family and friends and trying to destroy their families, trying to break up marriages, trying to separate kids from parents.
This is mafia shit.
It's unbelievably mafia shit. Yeah. But you know, we're hearing these stories over and over again. So whereas, yes, in theory, it seems like a great idea to get to base reality, sometimes it's actually better not to know. Because once you do, and especially if you're the kind of the person who can't let go once you start getting hot on a trail,
yeah,
now you're in big trouble, because what do? You can't let it go, but you can't pursue it, and it drives people crazy. So I don't know what the answer is to this overarching question. You know, to quote Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth, maybe. I don't know. As somebody who rabidly and instinctually pursues truth everywhere I can try to look for it, I worry I'm going to get myself into trouble, because I don't know when to stop looking. I don't know when to stop digging and poking. And, you know, there's a series of guys who have invented technologies that would allow us to get off of our dependence of fossil fuels. Every single one of them disappears. And this is a documented phenomenon. They either get paid off or they just disappear. Oh, I invented cold fusion in my basement. Yeah, we're going to hear from you in a month. No, we're not. You're gone, man. So there's this weird pattern of the people who get closest to the truth have bad things happen, or they just, we don't know what happens to them. General MacKatzlin, who's missing right now, read in on all the top government military programs, the most secret programs, read in on all the UFO stuff, 68 years old. For some reason that nobody knows, he leaves his glasses and his phone at home, grabs his revolver. He's an avid outdoorsman, goes for hikes all the time, lives in Albuquerque, walks out the door while his wife's at a doctor appointment. She comes home. He never comes back, but he's left all of his personal stuff at home. They have taken this from this small, like, where did this guy go, to it's now an international story that one of America's top cleared former generals, who has all kinds of state secrets in his head, isn't just gone. He's vanished without a trace. They have asked everybody in the neighborhood for their security camera footage, their Ring camera footage, like anything, that he doesn't show up anywhere. He's just gone. And a year ago, his research assistant disappeared.
So you're saying there's a chance. But so, right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I care about this. Like, and I know you do too. And I know you're not, I do. I know. But this doesn't just happen. I guess what I want to kind of go back to or steer into, and, you know, is that the world we live in has been constructed. You know, it's fabricated, as we've been kind of talking about it. And there were guys who built it, and there were guys who theorized it. And I'm not blaming them like this is all B.F. Skinner's fault. Okay. But there are certain logical extensions and maybe even logical inevitabilities that come out of certain worldviews or certain kind of social imaginaries. And Skinner also wrote a novel called Walden 2. And, it describes a kind of model community based on kind of behavioralists' learning principles, right? It's sort of his foray into utopian realization. And even though, of course, this is 1948 when he publishes it, even though, we've got, Brave New World and 1984 that are kind of warning us about totalitarian takeover and all this kind of stuff. And this is what George Marsden, an historian he's an historian, says. He says this. I want to, to try to steer us back and kind of contain this Skinner box thing. He says, Skinner, although a critic of traditional faiths, was a true believer himself. With an unshakable trust in the natural scientific method as the savior of humanity, he projected his mechanistic stimulus response methodology into an entire philosophy of human nature. He insisted, nevertheless, that through the benevolent use of modern principles for controlling human behavior, people could be taught to live in idyllic harmony. From a consistently scientific viewpoint, he was fond of pointing out each action or belief, including acts of will, must be determined by its antecedents. So the only real question, he argued, was whether we would continue to allow these external controls of human behavior to be accidental and haphazard, or should use our best knowledge to steer the controls in benevolent directions. I believe that there are people who believe they are steering us into benevolent directions. But I also suspect that these benevolent directions have become a monster too big for even them to control.
Well, I mean, that's where you find your Bill Gates of the world, these tinkerers who they don't have any problems left to solve. They don't have any personal needs anymore and never will again.
Right.
And so they start trying to solve the unsolvable problems of humanity. And they think of us as sheep or cattle or whatever else, who are too dumb.
Data.
Too dumb to like do the right thing on our own. And there's a lot of evidence for the fact that we are too dumb. In the aggregate, we make a lot of stupid decisions. And so, I don't know, like this gets back to Girardian mimetic desire, which leads to mimetic competition, which leads to mimetic violence. Like, I don't know that there is a way out of that pattern. And I think these guys are overestimating it, but maybe it's because their ultimate willingness to use draconian methods to just cull the herd of problems. I don't know what their plan is.
It seems to be inhuman.
Yeah. But I also believe that emergent behaviors arise from sufficiently complex systems. Like one of the beauties of the Catholic idea of subsidiarity comes from the fact that when you have a local, small, invested constituents, they can make better decisions than somebody far away from a much larger polity can make, right?
Which ironies, of course, abound, but keep going.
And so when, to go back to the Epstein thing that we've talked about before, there are necessarily going to be a larger number of people who have access to state secrets than you want to exist and then can be easily controlled. So then you have to devise mechanisms of more coercive control in order to keep those secrets safe. So, I continue to believe that, that the Epstein situation was designed both to assess scientists and what they were working on, because that was a big component of what he did, but also to create kind of a honeypot operation for powerful people so that they could be controlled and to create a system of détente through mutually assured destruction. Like, yes, we, the CIA, the Mossad, whoever, lured you into this awful situation where you committed crimes. And so, yes, we are guilty, but so are you. And we have you on film. So we won't reveal your secret and you won't reveal ours, but it's why it's never going to come out. It's why the really deep, dark stuff will never fully come out, because the reason that this system even existed was to control the most dangerous players on the board. And those players, once they have lost that detente, once the first nuke is launched, they're going to launch back, and then it destroys the system. So the system always self-protects.
Yeah, I think that's an important pattern or law. And when I think of mutually assured destruction, I think it really predates the Cold War. I think that it's been a component of the human condition since the beginning.
I mean, it's Romeo and Juliet, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. In other words, we tend to only think of it in terms of war or the Cold War or nukes. But I think one of the things you and I see with this Iran situation right now is a kind of owning up to lesser versions of mutually assured destruction. And the frustrations that I have with people talking about, really low res way, talking about Iran and Trump and all these sorts of things, are failing something really essential about the human condition. And I don't think neither of us revel in this truth. But just because I don't like something doesn't make it any less or more true.
Can you be more specific in unpacking what you mean by that?
Well, when you have somebody like Pope Leo talking about, peace and these kinds of things, it's like, peace is good, but I just feel like it's important to be more real about what peace actually means.
Yeah,
and
it's not the baseline condition. We keep coming back to that. It is not the baseline condition, and peace is only, it's cliche, but it literally is only attainable through strength.
Right. And therefore, why is there a border between, Germany and France, right? You could argue, you could make some comments about language and culture and these kinds of things, right? But when they kind of finally scale up to nation states, and maybe that's one of the problems, of course, is nation states, these massive, unruly things. The reason why, if there's ever peace between two sovereign nations that share a border, it's because neither of them want to incur the losses it would require to destroy the other. It's not because, like Brotherhood of Man type garbage. It's because the costs outweigh
the benefits.
Yeah. And therefore, I wonder then if what we're seeing break down in this post-war order, and the reason why I invoke somebody like Skinner here as one of the architects of this post-war order, is that it too was fabricated. And it really seems like it's pulling apart at the seams, that it lacks a fundamental coherence that can now only be assured by mafia-like tactics with scientists, for instance.
Well, I mean, the pretense of multilateralism or of international law or a rules-based order or any of this is all predicated upon an authority that can enforce that order.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that authority come from? It's not the divine right of kings. It's who has the strongest military.
Right. But with somebody like Skinner, the reason why I read that part, the only real question, he argued, was whether we would continue to allow these external controls of human behavior to be accidental and haphazard, or should use our best knowledge to steer the controls in a benevolent direction. right? In other words, it's the cult of the expert. It's the cult of the scientist, right? And that seems itself to be breaking down too. And you and I have both talked about the reason why science has been so powerful is because it's powerful. It works, right? Undeniably, right? But what gets smuggled in are these anthropologies. What gets smuggled in are these sort of conceptions of reality that are no longer holding.
But I think the reason that it's breaking down is not because the power isn't rightly vested there. I think it is because that power has been squandered and abused. You know, it has been turned into a religion. It has been turned into a pseudo goddess of reason.
Yeah.
And so when you have people saying trust the science, who number one aren't even scientists, they're public health officials, but number two, the idea that science is ever settled is itself a contradiction of the scientific process.
Right. And this is what Eric was arguing with Jesse, a couple of weeks ago. It's like, defy the laws of science. Well, then there's something wrong with the laws of science then.
Yeah.
And yet we're not allowed to go
people
there.
who know something about science in order to figure out what's broken.
Right.
Because you don't, go to your local garbage man to get a brain tumor removed. Like, you need people who have that special expertise. That's what it's for. And so I think that what we have is not science anymore. What we have is not an expert class anymore. We have a predatory class of pretenders. And that is why the institutional breakdown of trust has happened.
Yeah, that's good.
Because we need experts.
Yeah.
We need people who know how to do things that are hard.
We need competency.
Yeah.
Which often tracks with experts, right? I'm not, but they are two slightly different things.
Well, I mean, it depends on how the term is assigned, but
yeah.
Expert should really only be a term that is assigned to the most competent people in a field.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
In my opinion.
Real mastery. Yeah.
Real mastery is expertise. One of the things you and I talk about all the time, one of the problems with AI is that it is flush with knowledge and absolutely no wisdom. The wisdom is part of it. It's the wisdom, the ability to know when to apply a certain kind of knowledge, what to apply it to, when not to, when to hold back. That's wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to discern when to deploy the information and how. And that's not there.
Yeah, it really appears like the masters of our universe aren't wise,
right?
Actually,
and to go to not to go too far afield, but I mean, the conclusion to Pluribus is the perfect example, because in order to make her happy, they hand over a weapon that no person should have just because she asks for it.
Yeah.
And it's just this crazy. Like, okay, we have the knowledge of how to get it and how to give it to you. You shouldn't have it, but we're going to give it to you anyway.
Yeah.
Because there's no wisdom.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. Yeah, we're going to have to do a full address of Pluribus, aren't we? I finally finished it the other day. So
yeah,
you can see I've been kind of chewing on it in the background.
But we're in a really, really weird time. And I have said for years that I feel like we're headed towards a new dark age, not because of a lack of information, but because of a superabundance of information for which we have no tools of discernment.
Right. And so therefore, one of our burning questions is, how do we manage ourselves through this? What can we do about it? Maybe we have to be radically modest in terms of what we individuals, what we what we can do. But I'm not ready to give up exactly. And maybe that's my inner Don Quixote.
To give up what? I want to press you to be specific. Because I think that, we've spent a couple hours now kind of looping around the Skinner box idea without really understanding A, why it's really so important, and B, what we're supposed to do about it.
Well, the answer might not be popular, but I mean, for me, it's going to come down to, God, I'm going to sound so predictable here, but that's okay. It's what I really believe. Um, we're made in the image and likeness of God. And I believe with every fiber of my being, the classic line from the Baltimore Catechism, and I'm probably going to garble it, but I'll try. We're made, to know, love, and serve the Lord in this world and to be with him forever in the next.
Mhm.
And that is what I feel is at stake with the Skinner boxification of our social imaginary.
Why is that specific thing put at stake, put at risk through the manipulation of our behavior, of our understanding?
Because they can convince kids that they're not made in the image and likeness of God, and that flourishing is a romantic delusion, and that we are cells in an Excel spreadsheet, and we only register in worth insofar as we serve the machine.
But are there
like
no countervailing forces saying the opposite? I mean,
Yeah.
this to me is where the abdication of the Catholic Church in particular, because of its unique historical and civilizational influence, the abdication of its commitment to proclaiming what it believes to be the truth is critical here. Because if you have a world of Skinner boxes and Skinners, where are the, for lack of a better example, because it's not perfect, but where are the Bishop Sheens? Where are the guys who are going into those same environments and saying the contrary thing?
Even more radically, look, there's a reason why there's a St. Francis, right? If you think of St. Francis, there's a way in which you can understand him, maybe not understand him, but there's a way in which you can kind of understand him, that this is a young man that was brought up in the machine, so to speak, and he has this radical experience that leads him to see through the matrix. And his response, as haphazard as it is to rebuild the church. And of course, as the stories are told to us, he takes that literally at first, right? He literally starts putting stones back on this destroyed church, or this whatever, the story. Only he kind of stumbles into a sort of a deeper and deeper and deeper realization of what that call meant. Francis, rebuild my church, right? And so, how is it that a human being is capable of that kind of radical opting out? And by the metrics of the world, an utter failure, right? I mean, he denies all the normal stuff, in a radical way, a way in which, I must admit, even as a practicing Catholic, it's like, I don't understand it exactly.
Dude, take it down a notch.
Right.
I remember I took a whole class on him and from the world's foremost expert on St. Francis at the time, now deceased.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this guy is crazy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And look, I'm not, me, I'm not trying to put you into any kind of hot seat here at all. But that to me is such an arresting witness to an alternative mode of being that I can't quit. I can't, now I know most of us are called to being kind of relatively mediocre, bougie people. And I'm fine with that. We've talked about this, but that kind of radicality, to me, is an enduring witness of a different way of being. And you asked me earlier, what do I fear? That I fear that we're doing everything in our power to obscure that signal, even in their downstream, more mediocre iterations of love, self-sacrifice, a different kind of flourishing. And so maybe there are certain times in which the Skinner box that we all live in becomes unendurable and not worth saving. So you pull a Benedict and you say, you know what? I opt out. I'm going to go live in a cave in Subiaco or Monte Cassino, right? This kind of thing. And I want to in some small way bear witness to that option.
I want to end this with a slightly more upbeat pushback on that. I think that that I'm a fatalist about a lot of the things that are going on, and I'm like, it's like my whole thing about privacy is pretense. AI was inevitable from the minute we started building transistors. There's all these things that are fundamentally changing the world that we live in that we can't do anything about. Just because we turn things on doesn't mean we can turn them back off again, because they kind of attain a sort of critical mass. So the way that I approach things is look for the opportunities, look for the upsides, look for the things that you can do within this emergent environment that allow you to accomplish things that you couldn't have done before. Use the tools of oppression as tools of innovation. Use, like AI is going to be a very complicated thing for people. It's not only something that can be used, for control and for Skinner box activities. It's also something that can be used for total rebellion and revolutionary purposes and all kinds of stuff, and totally paradigm breaking stuff.
Yeah.
And it empowers people to do things in ways that they haven't done before. I think it's beginning to break the stranglehold on like our entertainment industrial complex in a way that has led to, for example, this movie that I went to see yesterday, Project Hail Mary, that everybody's talking about. I mean, I read this book 4 years ago. We did a cross-country road trip together with my family, and we listened to this whole book. And it's one of the greatest audiobooks we've ever listened to. Really, really well done story. But the movie captures that. But what I'm seeing a lot of people talking about is it is an end point to the cynical Hollywood era, the era of the anti-hero, the era of everything being dark and gritty, and it's like it ends on an extremely positive note. It's a story about unlikely heroes overcoming overwhelming odds. It's got humor, and it's family friendly. Like anybody can go see it. There's nothing objectionable in it at all, and it's killing it at the box office. And it's got the best reviews I've ever heard. And so take that and put that in a bucket, and then take the fact that you and I are both experiencing that people under the age of 35 are increasingly gravitating toward analog, real world experiences. They're getting rid of streaming services and they're buying vinyl albums. They are, Memorex just released a new version of the Walkman that I saw it on Twitter today. I go to Amazon, it's there, and it plays cassettes, and it's like you can listen to all your old cassette collections, high fidelity. It's got Bluetooth headphones and all this stuff, so it's got tech built in, but it's like future, retrofuturism.
Retrofuturism,
There's a new shop opening up here in Raleigh sometime this year, where they're going to have like magazines and records and like coffee and old toys and nostalgic stuff. Walter Kern's got Country Highway newspaper, and everybody's
I feel like
going
we were
crazy
made for
it.
this moment, Steve. Like I honestly, like this is so cool.
There's so much stuff that's happening that people are saying, I don't want my life to be completely taken over by artificiality.
Yeah.
I think we're still in the COVID hangover.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. You know, I've been harping on and on about why aren't there more late night coffee shops? And then I went to one the other day that was supposed to close at 6 and or 5, and I got there at 4:30, and I thought I'm going to grab a drink and go. I wound up. I get there. There's a sign that says Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday we're open till 8. I was like,
so
awesome.
Cool. That's so great.
And I ended up sitting in there talking to the barista for 3 hours because it wasn't busy, and we just had a conversation about all this stuff. And she was 31. And she was talking about how one of the reasons why the coffee shops aren't open is because nobody wants to work.
Nobody goes, right.
She's like, it's not because there's no demand. It's because we can't fill the schedule.
Wow.
And I hadn't even thought about that.
No.
But like, we're in this transitional period where people have gotten so used to comfort and luxury and luxury beliefs and being exposed constantly to that, you know, through social media, especially because young kids are on Instagram more than anything else. And it's all this aspirational crap that isn't real.
Yeah.
You know, so we're in this very tumultuous period, but I think we're skewing in a good direction.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know where it comes out because there's a lot of scary stuff going on too. But this realignment has positive outcomes.
Well, I didn't think that you'd be the one to save me from my blackpilling over here. This is amazing.
Well, I mean, like
you're
I told
reminding me of things that I believe in.
Like I told you yesterday, I have a dispositional inclination towards doomerism, so I fight it. But I also have this weird childlike sense of wonder. And anytime I see something cool, I'm like, that's amazing. Where can that go? Like, what can we do with that? You know?
Yeah.
So the doomerism in me comes from, you know, I'm the pike in the freaking fish tank that's had a lot of failure and a lot of negative experiences. And so it inclines me to protect myself by expecting the worst.
Yeah.
But there's some indomitable thing inside of me that's like, no, look for the good thing because there's so much cool stuff going on out there. And so I latch on to every one of those things that I can find. And I see green shoots. Will they grow to fruition? I don't know. But they're things that we didn't expect just a couple years ago.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think the future's written yet. And we're going to have to do an episode where we talk about what's going on with us going into space because it's amazing.
Yeah.
As a kid who grew up looking at the stars and thinking, man, I would just love to go out there. Like, we are in the next 3 years going to be rushing off this planet and into the great beyond.
So, you know, you said when we were having our preliminary discussion on what we would do with MTS, and you said, look, Kale, I don't want it to be like hot take central. But I think we can stand to do a little bit more hot taking. So I just want to put that out there on air, so to speak, because it's important, of course, to reckon soberly with the things that we did today. But I also think it's important that we can take these things that we are seeing and observing, and we can weave it into another story. This, you know, we might call them green shoots. Not so that we could just make this a green shoot podcast, because I do think it's important to reckon with all the nasty stuff. But I really appreciate your pushback here to recontextualize why I care about this stuff, and not this to simply be, you know, an excuse for Kale to doomer for a couple of hours.
This is a little bit of a heavy episode. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. But I think we can steer it. I think we can do a number of things. I think it's important to kind of build out these more idea heavy, conceptually heavy episodes like this. But I think my inspiration to do this is so that we can better situate.
Listen, 100%. I mean, you know, we're a slow growing podcast. we could have an episode like this that nobody watches, and I still think it's worth doing because we're building a corpus of thought and understanding that is synthesizing into something bigger. And I will say, I don't fully understand the way my own creative process works, but the intro to this show that people are pretty fond of.
Yeah, it's great.
I didn't know exactly what I was doing with it when I was doing it. I was following instinct. But when I think about it, it is a blend of optimism and very serious, like we have responsibility and concern because we are playing with fundamental forces of the universe. And like the one line says, upon this knowledge depends man's children and his children's children. Like, and the wise use of this knowledge. Like that's the thing that I think we're trying to get to is we didn't ask to be born when we were born. We got thrown into this mix and there's so much going on. How do we make sense out of it? How do we find the dangers and say, okay, well, we need to categorize those and make sure that we know what we're doing with those. But then also, where are the opportunities? Where are the chances for beauty and truth and goodness and art and music and transcendence and wonder and all the things that characterize that mid-century ethos that we've kind of glommed onto.
Yeah.
Because it was a very future-looking time.
Optimistic.
But it was coming out of something really dark.
Really dark, yeah. That's good. That's really good. That's a great pattern. And it's not to relive the 50s and the 60s. Neither of us are like that. But we can look, again, the epic task is to retrieve that which must be salvaged and to find a way not to make it happen again or to play it again, but create something new in this sort of new age.
Well, one of the greatest risks in a situation like we're in now is there's so much cynicism that we're all afraid of looking like rubes. We're all afraid of being too cringe. We're all afraid of being too gullible, too naive, too optimistic, too whatever. And I think we have to lean into, you know what? I would rather look like a fool because I was excited about something good than never be disappointed because I expect everything to go wrong.
Right. I agree. I've been thinking a lot about sort of finding a way to be post-cringe, right? Like to lean into the cringe, like to believe again. And I think that's what we're trying to do, man. So,
yeah. All right. That was a good way to wrap it up.
I appreciate it. All right. Take care, brother.
Thanks, man.
Those look promising. Hello there, friends. If you're enjoying monitoring the situation, do me a favor. Depress the like and subscribe buttons on your viewing screen. Have you done it yet?
Wasn't that easy?
Every single like, comment, and subscription sends a signal to YouTube's clever algorithm. This program is well worth watching. It helps the show appear in front of many more viewers. And that, friends, is how your support helps us grow this program and bring you even more fascinating shows in the future. Thank you so much for your compliance.
Give me your heart, honey. Give me your heart, honey. Give me a chance to talk about...